Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Liberal well, I mean, they're still there. And then this new independent group, which we don't yet know enough about, really, to have a strong opinion. Unless, of course, you are at the red-top tabloid end of British political analysis, in which case you will almost certainly already have a strong opinion built upon precisely no knowledge or understanding. So can we all agree that Chris Grayling is now, let me get these words right, how slavishly loyal to the Tory banner or the Brexit banner? Maybe this is actually a Brexit thing, but how blindly loyal? You know, we talk a lot about blind tribalism on the programme, but we're going to be talking about it in a slightly different way today. How blindly loyal to the Conservative Party would you have to be not to consider Chris Grayling to be one of the most incompetent politicians in the history, not just of British politics, in the history of the human race?
£33 million to Eurotunnel. The company said contracts for extra ferry services if there's a no-deal Brexit were given out in secret. Labour says the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, must go.
Transport Secretary Chris Grayling's double trouble. His blunders over no-deal Brexit planning cost millions, and his privatisation of the probation service hundreds of millions more.
In normal times, being responsible for one multi-million-pound mishap might be enough to end a ministerial career. But these are not normal times, and the fact that Chris Grayling managed to amass two hugely costly disasters in one day simply resulted in the customary backing of Downing Street. Our political correspondent Michael Crick reports.
£33 million, what it took ministers to settle a legal claim from the Channel tunnel operator Eurotunnel. A claim that Chris Grayling and the Transport Department failed to include Eurotunnel in the process for awarding cross-channel freight contracts in the event of no deal. The latest episode in what's already become a fiasco, with the pulling out 3 weeks ago of one firm who were included and did get a contract, Seabourn Freight, the ferry firm which owned no ships.
The country cannot afford Chris Grayling. He's got to go for the credibility of our nation, and my goodness me, the people who are working for him must be pulling their hair out. He stumbles from catastrophe to disaster, and it's just gross incompetence on an industrial scale.
Chris Grayling, as after the Seabourn Freight pullout 3 weeks ago, has been lying low, working all day inside the Transport Department, refusing requests for interviews and perhaps hoping the story will simply fizzle out. It was left to his colleague, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, to explain things. And to hear Mr. Hancock speak, you might think this wasn't an embarrassing climb down, but an extraordinary breakthrough, a triumph for government negotiations.
This is a really important agreement that we've come to as a government as a whole. It's very important that whatever the Brexit scenario, we can have that unhindered supply of medicines, and I can't emphasise enough how important the agreement that we've reached today is, because it allows us to have confidence that we'll have that unhindered supply of medicines, which everybody wants to see.
The risk was, the government say, that the judge in the Eurotunnel claim might next week have declared all the no-deal freight contracts invalid, endangering medicines so much ministers would have had to drop any thoughts of no deal. That in turn would weaken Britain's negotiating hand. And yet MPs look set to block no deal anyway, 12 days from now, which makes the 33 million look very expensive. So, one more for the growing list of Chris Grayling's ministerial failings. These include at Justice his ban on prisoners receiving books, later overturned in court. His new court fees, said to have made innocent people plead guilty, later scrapped by Michael Gove. The £200 million Carillion deal for jails, which collapsed and was completely unsustainable, a prisons minister later said. Then at Transport, last spring's chaos over the new rail timetable. He'd not asked enough tough questions, Grayling confessed. And of course, Seabourn Freight.
Chris Grayling seems to be overseeing projects that not only don't deliver, but also cost taxpayers dear. And I think he needs to look in the mirror and ask some long, hard questions about how he treats taxpayers' money. It's not other people's money, it's taxpayers' hard-earned money, and it's not being spent on things that it should be being spent on.
Despite today's barrage of criticism, and more no doubt in the Commons next week, Downing Street say Theresa May still has confidence in Chris Grayling, and that he has a very important job to do.
Well, arguably, Eurotunnel isn't the biggest problem that Chris Grayling has had to face today, and that bigger than that, perhaps, is this report from the National Audit Office on the part privatisation of the probation service that was carried out under Chris Grayling's watch at the Ministry of Justice 6 or 7 years ago. It's a pretty scathing document which says that the implementation of the reforms was rushed, introduced significant risks, and was poor value for money, and ended up costing almost £500 million more than was originally envisaged. And it says that more offenders actually ended up going back to jail, and of course private contracts had to be cancelled.
So why hasn't Theresa May got rid of him?
Well, I suspect that in normal times, if we didn't have Brexit, and perhaps under another Prime Minister, he would have been reshuffled out of the Cabinet quite a while ago. But you've got to remember that he and Theresa May are close allies dating back to Wimbledon Conservative politics in the 80s. He ran her leadership campaign. He's a strong Brexiter in the Cabinet, but loyal. He doesn't attack his colleagues publicly, doesn't cause her embarrassment, doesn't cause the government embarrassment, at least not on Brexit. And she's got to be aware of the delicate balance in the Cabinet between the forces. And of course, if Chris Grayling was to lead the Cabinet, the risk would be he would be another Brexit rebel in crucial Commons votes.
Thanks, Michael.
It is breathtaking that this man continues to walk through the loftiest corridors of public life. I mean, truly breathtaking. You reach for a Labour politician who you historically consider to be less than competent. I suppose, sadly, most obviously, there would be Diane Abbott's meltdown in this very studio under questioning from Nick Ferrari when she failed the most basic requirements of arithmetic. But that is one instance, one moment in time. Is that Martine McCutcheon? No, This Is My Moment. What's one moment in time? Anyway, I digress. I mean, in office, this is the point, not in opposition. So we'd have to go back to pre-2010. Who is that? Can we think of a Labour politician whose CV is so utterly replete with unmitigated disaster? I can't at the moment, and I'm open to reminders. That's not the point of the phone-in. You know, yesterday we were wondering whether or not we should come up with a unit of measurement for hangovers. So you could say that's a 5 stotias or whatever. Someone's already tweeted me, apropos nothing in particular, to say I've thought of a new measure of political ineptitude, James. It's called the Grayling scale, and that is. I mean, for generations to come. That's from Tommy in Warringham. For generations to come, they could say, well, yeah, I mean, he's bad, but is he a 10 on the Grayling scale? You say he's only about an 8. You could say he's fallen over. He's fallen off a stage at the party conference. He's landed on his head and his trousers are around his ankles, but he's still only a 6 on the Grayling scale, you could say. And I genuinely don't get it. And I wonder whether you do. I know that he's very loyal to Theresa May. I think they go way back. I probably should have checked before I come on air. So is it simply patronage? Is this the worst kind of patronage? Albeit that Chris Grayling is an elected MP, so it's not quite the same as a Donald Trump-style appointment. But when you look at some of the people in Donald Trump's inner circle, the ones that are still in it, not the ones that have been sent to jail for what they did while they were in it and are now telling the truth about what that inner circle actually involves and looks like. But the ones who, I mean, didn't he appoint a Canadian ambassador who's now going to the UN who says that she can see both sides of the science on climate change? I mean, these people are beyond normal reproach. But they're not elected politicians. They're appointments made by a profoundly corrupt politician. And regardless of Theresa May's myriad failings, I don't think it's fair to describe her as profoundly corrupt. I don't think she is profoundly corrupt. I think she's incompetent. I personally believe that she's racist in her attitude to everything from the hostile environment right through to Windrush and immigration. I agree with Anna Soubry. There you go. And a couple of weeks ago, I'd have been talking about Anna Soubry as being a member of the same party as Chris Grayling. That's what I mean by how hard it is to pin down precisely what we even mean. The Labour Party is the party of Jess Phillips and Jeremy Corbyn, Tom Watson and Jeremy Corbyn. How can that be a party in any traditional sense of the word? But that's not the point of today's conversation. Today's conversation is simultaneously silly and serious. It's funny to say, what is the point of Chris Grayling? But it's also serious because he is in the cabinet. He continues to be moved from one job to another, arguably promotions. Is Justice to Transport a promotion? And yet, you don't need to read the whole of The Secret Barrister's best-selling book, available in all good, mediocre, and indeed bad bookshops as we speak. A brilliant tome. And speaking of books, Brian Wood, who you met last week, Brian Wood, winner of the Military Cross and the now author, is going to be, I think I'm allowed to tell you, he's put it on Twitter, he's going to be going into the Sunday Times at number 3 on Sunday, so absolutely over the moon about that. I hope it stays in there as long as The Secret Barrister did, because that is an astonishing book that effectively fillets Chris Grayling's tenure as Secretary of State for Justice and concludes that the man is a complete oaf. I don't think... someone's just sent me the words John Prescott. I can't think off the top. I mean, John Prescott's problems were more personal than political. He punched someone who threw an egg at him. Personally, I think that's a perfectly acceptable response. He got caught playing away from home, which was unfortunate and pretty despicable. In terms of policies that he actually enacted while being a Secretary of State for any given subject, off the top of my head, I got nothing. Largely because during his most powerful period, he was a Deputy Prime Minister. He didn't have a portfolio. But I could be wrong. I mean, again, as I say, there's no party political loyalty involved in today's conversation because, well, I suppose in the simplest of terms, I don't have a political party at the moment. I will vote for my constituency MP, despite the fact that her party is led by Jeremy Corbyn. So, how does he still have a job? 0345 6060 973. How can he still have a job? If Amber Rudd resigns, I know she came back, but she resigned on a point of principle, everything Chris Grayling has touched since Theresa May became Prime Minister has turned to manure. Every single thing. He has the opposite of a Midas touch. Even the Midas touch, of course, is slightly misrepresented in popular parlance. It was a curse, not a blessing. The poor bloke died. But I digress. Everything Chris Grayling has done is disastrous. I mean, literally everything. Normally, you'd think giving a contract to a shipping company with no ships, claiming that due diligence had been done, dismissing all criticism, and then retreating completely a couple of weeks later and removing said contract for shipping from shipping company with no ships. That would do for you at work, wouldn't it? And then, I could go through, there's pages of it. Absolutely pages of it. Unbelievable. Catalogues. Do you remember the books for prisoners? Came up with the idea that it wouldn't be a good idea for prisoners to have books. Today, it is his tenure as Justice Secretary that is under scrutiny because, well, guess what? It's been a disaster. We took call after call after call from both prison officers and probation officers on this programme a few years ago, telling us that this would happen, warning us that as night follows day, disaster would follow Chris Grayling. His reforms of probation have failed to reduce reoffending. They've led to skyrocketing numbers of released offenders being returned to prison for breaching their licence. And they've raised questions over plans, well, causing problems for his successor at Justice, who is now having his plans to abolish jail terms under 6 months called into question. This is from the National Audit Office. Between January 2015 and September 2018, the number of offenders recalled to prison for breaching their licence conditions rose by almost half. That's a 47% increase, attributed entirely by the NAO to Chris Grayling's decision in 2015 to extend statutory rehabilitation to offenders serving sentences of less than 12 months. The big part of the problem is who that work was given to as well. You remember the scheme where outside contractors took over responsibility for low and medium risks was closed early at an extra cost to the taxpayer of £470 million, all on Chris Grayling's watch. So there's two ways into this today. The first is, as ever on this programme, the knowledgeable and informed way into it. And I'm not particularly knowledgeable and informed about the mechanics of the disastrous decisions that he has taken. 03456060973. You might work in the probation service, you might work for the parole board, you might have an insight into his tenure at the Department of Justice that the rest of us don't currently have. I'd love you to talk to me about whether it's fair to describe him as the worst frontline politician in the history of the human race. 03456060973. If you're a friend of his, if you know him, if you like him, can you make a case for the defence? Give us some evidence of things he's done that should be taken into account before we reach a judgment on whether or not he is the worst frontline politician in the history of the human race. 03456060973. Otherwise, if like me you watch these things from the outside with an ever-growing sense of wonder, why is he still in the cabinet? In your view, and I do like listening to views and opinions, not as much as I like being educated and enlightened, but views and opinions can be enlightening in their own way. Why do you think he's still in the cabinet? And if you want to stick up for him, I would love to talk to you today, because presumably that is a weapons-grade inability to allow criticism of somebody on your, quotes, side. And I'm going to presume that the side would have more to do with Brexit than the Conservatives. And that's far from a right-wing disease. Criticism of Jeremy Corbyn is punishable by death in the minds of many of his supporters. So it is by no means confined to Conservative circles that any notion of criticising your team is a sign of heresy. But we focus today on Grayling, who is, for my money, the worst politician in my lifetime, possibly the worst politician in the history of the British Parliament, and quite possibly, look, the worst politician in the history of the human race is not going to work, because, Hitler was a politician. So obviously there's a degree of tongue inserted into a portion of cheek when I say that. But if you were to rule out genocide, and what else could you rule out? Despicable behaviours, in terms of sheer competence, why on earth is Chris Grayling still in the cabinet? It's 10:16. Some breaking news for you. The so-called musician Sion Broughton has just been jailed for 8.5 years at Winchester Crown Court for the manslaughter of Luella Fletcher Mitchie, and 3 charges of supplying drugs. The story has received a lot of coverage in the media because Luella is, of course, the daughter of the Holby City actor John Mitchie. It's a horrible, horrible story, but the sentencing does constitute breaking news, and that is why I'm sharing it with you now. And he spent £72,000 defending a High Court challenge to his ban on family members sending books to prisoners. He scrapped criminal court charges of up to £1,000, which critics said would make innocent people plead guilty after more than 50 magistrates quit in disgust. That was a Grayling idea. He masterminded an ill-fated £5.9 million deal with Saudi Arabia to run a training programme for prisons. I imagine being in that meeting. Sorry, Chris, we're going to do what? That was dropped after a public outcry. A £23 million prisoner tagging scheme unveiled by Chris Grayling was also axed after the firm he awarded the contract to failed to deliver on the hardware. New rules demanding that victims of domestic violence must provide proof the abuse was recent before claiming legal aid were branded invalid by the Court of Appeal. Then you've got the legal aid for prisoners story. Cuts there were adjudged to be, for prisoners in particular, unlawful and unfair. And then the plans to privatise 3 prisons were dropped within months of being announced in the fallout from the electronic tagging scandal. Serco had to hand back almost £70 million after that. Tribunal fees. Today's ruling ridiculed the government's misunderstanding of elementary economics and plain common sense when it claimed higher fees would mean increased demand. And that we haven't even touched on transport when he claimed that he wasn't in charge of the trains and the shipping. A report by Chief Inspectors of Probation and Prisons published last year said his botched privatisation of the probation service could be dropped with negligible impact. So I just go to the phones. I've got nothing left. How does Chris Grayling still have a job in the cabinet? And you really need to have some substantive answers to that question. Is he the worst frontline politician in living memory? We used to call Jeff Hoon buffoon, but I was very young back then. You know, I can barely remember Tony Blair's premiership. Was Jeff Hoon as bad as Chris Grayling? Christabel's in Ramsgate, appropriately enough. How are the ships coming along, Christabel?
Well, I'm looking out of my spare room window to the empty harbour.
Yes. The recently dredged harbour.
The recently dredged at my council tax paid for that.
So in preparation for the non-existent ships?
In preparation for the non-existent ships.
Commissioned by Chris Grayling?
Absolutely, all by Chris Grayling, who, as we say in Ramsgate, you have to clap your hands and believe in fairies. Ferries.
Oh, very good. Yes, I like that. But anyway, that ship has sailed. That wasn't even deliberate. But that particular super ship has sailed. Can you make sense of this at all?
I can make no sense of it at all, because not only did he back a stymied port that closed down years ago because of lack of traffic, but he risked his what was left of his reputation, which, what would you put it at, 0.5% on this absolutely disastrous...
Well, he didn't risk his... This is the fascinating thing, isn't it? Because he has no reputation to risk. I wonder if that's part of the answer that we're going to grope our way towards this hour.
Gung-ho.
Well, he's not even gung-ho. He's still there because he has no reputation. So he's like a fire blanket. Theresa May can bring him out whenever utter disaster is on the agenda, because
then, James, this is what sorry to interrupt you, this is what terrifies us as residents of Ramsgate, because next in the pipeline of Grayling disasters is his DCO, which he's granted, Development Consent Order. He has granted personally, Chris Grayling, to allow disastrous plans for Manston Airport to be reopened, so for the land to be taken off people who already own the land, a British company who own the land, to build houses on it. He has granted a DCO, Development Consent Order, with a company which is registered in Belize. So here we come. We've got the next...
Well, hang on. I haven't checked any of this, so I'm going to take your word for it.
It's all, but it's all out there. It's with the planning inspectors at the moment.
Okay.
He allowed it to be. So it's a company led by a struck-off solicitor, a man called Tony Ford.
You're scaring the life out of me now. We haven't checked any of this, Christabel. I can't. I mean, I don't doubt you at all, but I can't sort of let these things go unchallenged if my ignorance, I'm afraid, is the problem. I don't know of which you speak, and you're bringing more detail, more evidence of Chris Grayling's apparent idiocy. Aren't they supposed to be using that airport as a car park?
They're going to be using the airport for Operation Stack, another thing that he's granted and allowed through. So this is a dual carriageway linking Ramsgate to Sandwich. But following that, he is allowing it to be investigated to reopen the old site at Manston Airport, which closed down due to lack of air traffic.
You're pursuing understandably, you're pursuing a local agenda, and I applaud you for it. But I can't go any further without understanding it better myself. So I will lead you back, if I may, towards the question that informs this hour of the programme. Why is he still in the cabinet?
Why is he still in the cabinet? As I said to somebody the other day, in normal circumstances he'd have been sacked, and they said in normal circumstances he'd never have a job. Well, that's not true. He had a job under David Cameron. He was, I think he was Shadow Home Secretary, wasn't he, when he said that B&B owners should be free to turn away gays? Just why does he still have a job? Why? Well, I think you were on it with your no reputation to defend. I think it's like, okay, well, there's nothing left of him, so he's a fire blanket that we throw at all of these disastrous projects, and he's there with the land. So they all know he's rubbish? Everyone except him knows he's rubbish? Or does Theresa May still... He's milking it for as long as he can. I think I imagine his desk in the ministry with a great big stack of post-it notes going, yeah, that'll do. And he slaps them on everything that arrives on his desk.
He went to Cambridge. I know that that's not necessarily indicative of a mighty intellect, but it certainly suggests he's not as thick as he seems. He studied history at Cambridge University, published a number of books. He worked at the BBC and Channel 4 before going into politics. I don't get it. The only thing that possibly makes sense of this, do you know when he was born?
I'd have a stab at it.
Go on.
No, tell me.
April Fool's Day.
1st of April.
The 1st of April, 1962. He's only 10 years older than me. Oh, then again, that's probably more a reflection of how out of touch I am with my own age rather than a reflection on his. Oh, my days. What are we doing? Peter is in Newcastle. Peter, can you make sense of Chris Grayling's continued presence in the Cabinet?
Yes, I think it's quite simple, really. I think in normal times, it would have gone. You referenced Amber Rudd resigning on a point of principle. Clearly,
she was left with very, very little choice. The nature of that particular pincer movement was such that she ended up saying things in the House of Commons, I think unwittingly, but they were said and they were demonstrably, they were later proven to be untrue. I guess Grayling hasn't quite done that, has he? But you'd think this catalogue of disaster would have done for any other politician at any other point in history.
None of his disasters, in reality, are as bad as the Prime Minister's disaster of losing a vote by 150 votes in the House. And she didn't resign.
Which one?
In normal when she lost the meaningful vote, when she lost by 150 votes.
Yeah, but Brexit is a lens that distorts everything, and while it will be part of the explanation as to Chris Grayling's continued presence in the Cabinet, it can't be all of it. All normal rules are suspended in the context of Brexit, but his tenure as Justice Secretary and most of his decisions as Transport Secretary have had nothing to do with Brexit, so I can't quite let that pass.
I think part of the other thing, though, James, is if you look at what Rees-Mogg referred to as the payroll vote on the Tory benches, there are something like 130 people on the payroll vote out of the Conservative members. They are running out of people who can fill positions, because you've got people who would never join the government, you've got people who resigned from the government.
That might be true again in the...
She's fishing from a shallow pool.
She doesn't have a lot to choose from, and that payroll thing refers to people with government appointments who are therefore duty-bound to follow the government line on any votes, although I suspect that you're going to see the ERG bottling it in the coming days. I think the likelihood of Theresa May getting her deal through... I said this when I got back from my holiday. I couldn't quite believe the words came out of my mouth, but I think since I said it on Monday, it's increased actually quite a lot this week. But watch this space. That's not one of my predictions based upon understanding. It's a very speculative prediction. Coming out to 10:30, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. He was the editor of the Business Daily programme on Channel 4. He was a producer rather than a journalist, but that shouldn't matter. Business development manager on BBC Select. I think I know people like Chris Grayling. I think they're the people who end up with these jobs you don't understand because they were rubbish at making programmes or doing any journalism, all of which adds to the clamour of this question. Why is Chris Grayling... Give me a ring if you're a Tory diehard. Seriously, if I'm the kind of person that makes you milk curdle, normally. Why is Chris Grayling still in the Cabinet? Defend him. 0345 6060 973. Right, come here a minute. I want to tell you something, and you might not believe me, but I promise you this is true. I haven't got the timeline in front of me. I don't know the chronology. But when we decided this morning to turn our attention upon Chris Grayling and the abiding mystery of how the hell he's still in the Cabinet, actually how the hell he's still employed by anyone, anywhere, I didn't know that the High Court was due today to judge. I didn't know there was a likelihood of a judgment coming in on Eurotunnel's suing of the government over what they described the secretive way in which those ludicrous contracts were awarded. I didn't know that story was going to drop while we were on today. My focus on Chris Grayling was built today, the decision to do it today, entirely upon the reports regarding his probation service reforms, which are universally adjudged to have been disastrous. But since we've come on air, and this dropped on the BBC website just 4 minutes ago now, and I'll read you the whole story because it's only 4 sentences. So just think about this from my point of view. I am a radio presenter. I do a lot of work for charity. Now, I am a radio presenter, but I'm also ostensibly a journalist of sorts. And my biggest decision every day is what am I going to talk to you about, in the hope that you will want to talk to me about it. And so today we decided, looking at probation and knowing the calls we've taken over the years, to talk about Chris Grayling and his incomprehensible incompetence. If Chris Grayling woke up every morning determined to be as incompetent as possible, he would struggle actually to be as incompetent as he's managed to be without trying to be as incompetent as is humanly possible. So we hit the 10:30 news, and I just have a little shufti at what's unfolding. And I just stumbled. I swear on all that I hold holy that I had no idea this story was possibly going to break today, that this judgment or this settlement was going to be reached. In fact, it's not a judgment that's been handed down, it's a settlement that's been reached, so there was no way of knowing that this was going to happen today. The government will pay £33 million to Eurotunnel in an agreement to settle a lawsuit over extra ferry services in the event of a no-deal Brexit. In December, the Department for Transport contracted 3 suppliers to provide additional freight capacity for lorries. Eurotunnel said the contracts were handed out in a secretive way. As part of the agreement, Eurotunnel has agreed to make some improvements at its terminal. I don't understand the full details. I don't know the full details yet, so I can't understand them. But it would appear that since we came on air at 10 o'clock this morning, questioning Chris Grayling's continued presence in the Cabinet, he has weed another £33 million of public money up the wall. Since we came on air. Any little reservations, I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't have any reservations in the back of my mind that we were being a little unfair to Chris Grayling would, if they'd existed in the first place, have been completely annihilated by the revelation that another £33 million has made its way out of the Treasury into the pockets of the private sector as a consequence of his incompetence, it would seem, because, of course, the Secretary of State for Transport, when those 3 suppliers were contracted to provide additional freight capacity for lorries, was Christopher Grayling. DOB, April Fool's Day. Sandra's in Bramley in South York, just outside Doncaster, is it?
That's right, yeah. It's Rotherham.
I know, yes, I know Bramley, believe it or not.
All right.
What made you pick up the phone today?
Just listening to you talk about Chris Grayling.
So what's going on, Sandra? He wouldn't last 10 minutes in any other business.
He wouldn't, no. And funnily enough, I'm a member of the Stop HS2 Bramley Action Group.
Okay.
And we had a joint meeting of all the local action groups the other night, and this subject actually came up about why is this man still in a job? And the only thing we could come up with was that Theresa May at the minute is so desperate to have people on her side that she's keeping him, close to her. And I think as soon as Theresa May either, is voted out or whatever and Brexit's done, I think he'll be out.
Because I was going to, so it's not a million miles away from a previous caller's suggestion, and I held fire on picking over it because, but it is. She is so short of friends that she will keep Grayling close, even though his incompetence has now reached nuclear levels.
Yeah, but the point we've got to make here is it's all right her keeping him close, but she's allowing this man to be in charge of the biggest infrastructure project we've ever seen. He's already failed on I'll say smaller projects.
I understand, like Christabel down in Ramsgate, you've got a very personal animus with HS2. For me, although he is currently Transport Secretary, oddly enough, HS2 isn't Grayling's baby, is it?
No, but what you've got to understand is, as an action group, we do lots of correspondence between DFT and that, and we've tried to get meetings with Chris Grayling and one thing and another, which he seems to refuse to want to do.
So even though it's not his baby, he's inherited it, and when you look for some causes for optimism or enthusiasm that he might be able to deliver HS2 in a positive way, you look at his CV and you pull your hair out.
Yeah, but not only that, I don't know if you know about HS2, but we're fighting in South Yorkshire because we were originally promised a high-speed station at Meadowhall, and that was taken away from us a couple of years ago.
I know, and I'm feeling bad, Sandra, because I am going to. No, because we are only talking about Chris Grayling today, and you're ringing up an HS2 phone in, which I'm not conducting.
What I'm saying is, this man is in charge of HS2, and he is allowing them to spend tons and tons of money before anything's even been started. Is allowing them. If you go on the government website, you can subscribe, and it'll bring you up the spending of HS2 over the last couple of years. It's just come up actually, and it tells you month by month. And if you read that, it may honestly.
And then you think they can't be as bad as it looks, and you remember what Boris Johnson has done with that bridge down here in London, and you think actually maybe it is as bad as it looks. Maybe millions and millions and millions of pounds are making their way out of the public purse to a mysterious destination that no one's going to be held to account for in the future. You understand why I'm moving on, because this isn't an HS2 phone-in. This is only about Chris Grayling. But if I were you and I was part of the Bramley HS2 action group, then my already profound misgivings about HS2 would be magnified immeasurably by the fact that Chris Grayling is currently in charge of it, Sandra. Can we part as friends?
Yeah, we can.
Thank you. We'll speak again. 10:42. I have to keep my hand on the tiller on this one because, I know that in Ramsgate, Manston Airport is huge. I know that in Bramley, HS2 is huge. But as a national issue, about a national figure, how is Chris Grayling still in the Cabinet? I'll take anything you've got. 0345 606 0973. Naomi is in Tainbridge in Devon. Naomi, why is Chris Grayling still in the Cabinet?
Probably for the same reason that I used to give my ex-husband's favourite mugs to a toddler.
Expand?
I think that the only logical reason that Theresa May has put in all of these incompetents into positions of power is because she wants them to screw it up to the point where Brexit doesn't have to happen.
I wish you were right. I might have given you... I know. 6 months ago that might have carried well, but she wants it to happen. She wants it to happen more than she's ever wanted anything in her whole pitiable life.
She's really going out of her way to screw it up if she is.
No, she's not. Crikey, I can't believe you've done this. You're horrible. You've boxed me into a corner where I now have to mount a sort of defence, and a sincere one, of Theresa May. Couldn't have unfolded any differently. Once they decided, as she had to, that the weaponisation of free movement was the only thing that was deliverable, therefore she brought in the red lines. The minute the red lines ran roughshod headlong into the Good Friday Agreement against the backdrop of abolishing freedom of movement, nothing that has happened since then could have happened any differently at all. So it's not her fault. There you go. I said it out loud.
Can I just say something else?
Yes.
I didn't actually ring in to talk about Chris Grayling. I work in media literacy for a European NGO.
Oh yes.
And I travel all around Europe teaching people how to train media literacy. I just got back from Serbia and things like that.
Gosh.
And I work with the European Commission sometimes as well. And what you do is really, really valuable, and I really like it. But you're never going to convince these people because you're talking facts and they talk belief. And when people believe things, they react to facts as though they are existential threats.
Yes, I don't know, you're right. I do try and explain that as well, although, as you quite rightly point out, not with a great deal of success. And it comes down, in the context of Brexit, to the feeling that the European Union is our enemy. And if you just don't recognise that because it's not true, you can't engage intellectually with people who do. You can't reason people out of a position that they haven't been reasoned into, to put it pithily.
Yes, exactly it. I thoroughly enjoy it. Utterly futile.
Hang on a minute. It's not utterly futile. I do receive messages every day from people who thank me for helping them to see the light. So just because a significant rump of the population will never see the light doesn't mean it's completely pointless to keep one's headlamps on. Thank you very much. Naomi, take care. It's 10:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's not Thursday, that was yesterday. We had quite a good mystery hour, but I take your point, Graham. This is one of the greatest mysteries of all time, to pop up its beady little eyes outside the context of mystery hour. Why is Chris Grayling still in the Cabinet? And look at this, okay, 3 stories today. 3 stories today. The ferries, 33 million quid. Boom, gone, finished. Chris Grayling's fault. The probation service, considerably more money, utterly wasted. Boom, gone, Chris Grayling's fault. And I don't think this is his fault, but the government's so-called right-to-rent scheme has, according to the High Court, caused racial discrimination and violated human rights laws. This is the idea that private landlords should check the immigration status of potential tenants, which we said at the time will mean they won't check the immigration status of potential tenants. They'll just turn down anybody who might be foreign to avoid the possibility of them not being here legally. Guess what? It happened. Guess what? The High Court has adjudged it, so guess what? We were right all along. 3 stories today for this government. 3 stories. The ferries, the probation service, the landlords, the right to rent scheme, all fallen apart. Any other point in human history, well, no, any other point in British political history, all 3 of those stories would be scandals. But through the lens of Brexit, they're just punctuation marks. He makes the rest of them look good, and she's seriously short of friends. That will be the epitaph of Chris Grayling's cabinet career. Do you know, stuff we haven't even mentioned, the railways, as in the complete collapse of some services, the new timetables introduced when he was Transport Secretary, and actually, odd though it sounds, because it wasn't a triviality if you were caught up in it or if you lost millions of pounds as a result of the disruption, but he was warned severally that the British airports were susceptible to drone problems. And you remember just before Christmas, God, it feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? It was only a couple of months ago. It's March, by the way. We're leaving the European Union this month. I don't know if you've noticed, nobody now is talking about the good things that are going to happen. Literally nobody. But it is only a couple of months ago that Gatwick Airport was brought to a complete standstill by reports of drones being sighted in the sky, something which the Secretary of State for Transport had been warned repeatedly about, but chose to do nothing. Everywhere you look, I got one good thing. He started the process which secured a posthumous pardon for Alan Turing, the man who cracked the Enigma code and was prosecuted for his sexuality. So he did start the process that secured that. Whether or not that cancels out his public statements as Shadow Home Secretary that businesses should be free to turn away gay customers for being gay, I leave you to decide. But the question of why Chris Grayling is still in the cabinet, answer, he makes the rest of them look good, and Theresa May is so short of allies that she has to keep him there. And he's the one you send out. I don't think I've ever interviewed Grayling, but I noticed something when someone else was interviewing him, and I presume it's deliberate. He pauses in the middle of sentences, which is a genius thing to do if you don't want to answer any questions. It's so much better than what Jeremy Corbyn does, which is just avoid interviews and then complain afterwards that the journalists asked him questions he didn't want to be asked. God damn those journalists. You see, when Lewis Goodall at Sky interviewed him about being Labour leader, and he turned up at a rally in Broxtowe the next day, or later that day, and complained that the political correspondent at Sky News had asked the Labour leader questions about being Labour leader instead of asking him questions about poverty and homelessness. Incredible. Grayling does the interviews and says nothing, which is a much bigger gift than doing the interviews, getting petulant and complaining about them afterwards. So there's your answer, possibly. Why is Chris Grayling still in the cabinet? Because he can go on the radio, he can go on the television, be interviewed about the latest disaster and get over the finishing line with his clothes still on. And part of the way he does it is by pausing in the middle of sentences, which just throws everything slightly off kilter and gets you that bit closer to the finish line. And if I stop now in the middle, you're not going to interrupt me, you see? But if I get to the end of the sentence, or I have actually said enough for the point to be clear to the interviewer, for example, by claiming that, I don't know, that the railways are not my responsibility, then I'll pile in on you and I'll get you. But if I pause halfway through the sentence and it's a 3-minute interview slot, then I get that little bit closer to the end of the interview without being interrupted, and when you start interrupting me, I'm watching the clock and I'm over the line. I'll stop doing that now because people are probably adjusting their radios or waking up. You've got me on as a background noise and I start doing stuff like that. It actually jars you, doesn't it? See what I'm doing? I'm playing with your minds. Nigel's in Bromley. Nigel, what have you got?
Hi, James. Yeah, you're playing with my mind, yeah?
That's my job, mate.
That was,
smoke and mirrors.
What you're saying, why is Chris Grayling still in the job? I'm mentioning to your researcher there the Peter Principle. which I'm sure I've heard you talk about. If I've not, it's been somebody else. But
I've used the phrase because it's about sort of rising or failing upwards, isn't it? You rise to the level of your incompetency, but I don't quite understand. I don't fully know what that means.
I can't say I do either, but...
Never mind. Talking about Chris Grayling, you don't have to understand anything.
No, it's very, very difficult, isn't it? But it says in a hierarchy, which is the main point of it, and the fact that it's in a hierarchy that this happens. But the government shouldn't be a hierarchy, really, should it?
How do you mean?
Should be... Well, it should be good people do good jobs, and if they don't do good jobs, they get moved aside for other people to do good jobs. But that doesn't seem to happen. Maybe actually what it is describing is that the government is a hierarchy, and that and it's a club whereby, just like a school, you can't move someone out or sideways. You have to move them upwards.
It didn't used to be like that. I mean, you know,
no, I don't think it did.
There've been.
But, now we've got Boris
Justine
Johnson,
Greening. Justine Greening got her sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap, didn't she? I always worry slightly when I do this live because I haven't got any points of reference in front of me. I've only got my own memory banks. But it's, I mean, even Theresa May has got rid of cabinet level or nearly cabinet level ministers just because she didn't like them anymore, and Grayling is still there.
Maybe there's a reason for that as well, is that they didn't agree with her.
Yeah?
Which
whereas he just says whatever needs to be said to stay in job.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter how good he is at anything because there's no accountability and there's no...
well, this speaks of a degree of moral corruption on the part of the Prime Minister, which I rejected in my introduction because I don't think that that's a fair description of her. But if she keeps somebody in her cabinet who she knows to be incompetent, she knows to be disgraceful in many, many ways, proven to be an absolute disaster zone, and she keeps him there because it suits her, there is a degree of moral corruption attached to that.
There absolutely is, and I don't think it could be more obvious how incompetent he is, given your well-researched length of...
It's all there, and then, I mean, amazingly, mate, because I know people won't believe me that it was a coincidence, but within 30 minutes of coming on air, another story of Chris Grayling's weapons-grade incompetence dropped live on the BBC, and you know, live on the news. It came, the settlement has been reached with Eurotunnel, 33 million quid, because of those contracts given to outfits like Seabourn Ferries being so secretive. I don't get it. What would he have to do? Here's a question for you, Nigel. What would he have to do to get fired?
Well, given that the present-day politics is, Trump can say he can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and still
we're not there yet. I mean, there are things that you could... Amber Rudd had to say something in the House of Commons that was demonstrably untrue. So Grayling's kind of done that, hasn't he, when he claimed that due diligence had been done on Seabourn Ferries? Because if due diligence had been done, they wouldn't have had to take the contract away after it emerged that they were completely useless.
Well, obviously that's not one of the criteria of getting fired, because he's done that and is still in the job, so it isn't one of the criteria of getting fired, is it? Just saying demonstrably untrue things. And if that were the case, then Boris Johnson would be...
But he would have been fired rather than allowed to walk away voluntarily in order to pretend that things could somehow have gone better. That's why George Eustace, or George Useless, as I'm told he's referred to by colleagues, that's why George Useless resigned yesterday from the Department for Environment. This is within days of Michael Gove describing what no-deal Brexit would mean for farmers, for agriculture, for food. One of his junior ministers resigns in protest at the potential extension of Article 50. I think George Useless tried to become an MP via UKIP before he was shepherded into the Conservative folds. So, I mean, crikey. I mean, there's something in that. So few friends. She's got so few friends that Chris Grayling's slavish loyalty, like a really slobbery Labrador. No, Labradors are quite bright. What's the dumbest dog? The dumbest friendly dog? If you wanted a pet, poodles are clever. How dare you? Wash your mouth out with water. Especially poodle, Cavalier, King Charles Spaniel crosses. Or Cavapoos, as we call them. What's the dopiest dog? You want something like the dog in Garfield. There you go. What's the dog in Garfield called? Is it Chris Grayling? Is it actually called Chris Grayling, the dog in Garfield? That is what you're talking about here. Chris Grayling is the dog in Garfield. Theresa May is John, the owner of Garfield and the dog in Garfield, whose name escapes me, but as the crescendo rises in the background, someone is going to say in my ear before we reach it. There we go. Odie, the dog in Garfield. So Chris Grayling is Odie, Theresa May is John. Who's Garfield?